Okay, can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Here we go.
Yep.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go over the new purchase agreement. On the 14th, this is going to automatically replace the purchase agreement that you're using now. So I think we'll get started on that question. I think the first question that you should have is, what if I write an offer on the 13th and I get a counter on the 15th? What do I do about this new one? And I think that the answer is you have two choices. You can rewrite it on the new one, or we can just use the old one. I'm happy with you using the old one and the other broker countering the old one. The next question is, what if somebody writes an offer on the 13th or 12th on one of my listings, and we have counters in progress, and then this new one comes up on the 14th? I'm fine with you having it redone to a new one. And look at, I'm admitting people instead of Derek. So I'm fine with you having it redone on the new one, and I'm fine with you just countering the old one. The issue is we don't want to use it after the 14th. So any offer written from the 14th on should be the new one, because many of the addendums and things are going to be changed in zip forms to match this purchase agreement. So I don't know that I gave you the black and white answer you're looking for, but the answer is that it's going to be fine either way. And if you aren't sure, just ask one of us and we'll help you. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. The next thing is that this purchase agreement, I'm going to close my door, it's a little loud in my office. So the next thing is this purchase agreement, it looks very different, but it's really very similar to the old agreement. So I'm going to go over it now. And the beauty is this agreement, I know it's many, many pages. So it's a 16-page agreement. But really, once you're done with the first 3 pages or 4 pages, you're almost done with it. And I'm going to show you that now. So we're going to start at the beginning, and it's really no change. You put in the date, you put in who the offer's for, you put in the property to be acquired, the address, the city, the county, the zip code, the APN, so no changes there. It also says that brokers are not part of the agreement, no change there. And then it has your agency confirmation. Remember, one thing different here, many of you came from Sotheby's or Coldwell Banker or Keller Williams. A lot of you came from Sotheby's, and it's like one Sotheby's in the Valley and one Sotheby's in the city and a different Sotheby's in Westlake Village. So you could be Sotheby's, could be the buyer, the seller only and the buyer only. And Keller Williams you could, and Coldwell Banker you could, but at Rodeo you can't. So there's only one brokerage. So if you're Rodeo, if you're both Rodeo, we're both buyer and seller. You all know that, right?
Yeah.
So we never write Rodeo Realty, seller, Rodeo Realty buyer. So keep that in mind. And it's the same thing with the agents. So unfortunately, if it's 2 agents at 2 offices, we're still both, if it's both Rodeo. Any questions there?
Nope.
Okay. I don't like that they put in this agent one where the agent talks about if they're both or whatever, because it should just stay the same as the brokerage. The next thing is, remember, if you have like a split listing or a split buyer, then you're going to go into this number C. There's that ABA form, and that's where you would write additional brokers. So let's say, you split a listing, Rodeo and Keller Williams, Rodeo and Sotheby's. This would have one of us, Rodeo. So don't write Rodeo / Sotheby's and the license / the license. You're supposed to write like Rodeo. And then you do this more than one broker, number C, this ABA form, and then you write Sotheby's and they come together. Everybody with me?
Yep.
Great. Obviously, competing buyers and brokers, that's automatically pops up, possible representation of more than one buyer and seller, just like before. Now here's where it gets different. So all your stuff is going to be filled out in these next few pages. So what they've done is they've taken the purchase agreement, and you can still read about each one. So 5 here and 5 on the old contract is still 5, I believe. 5B talks about cash, 5 talks about the entire purchase. Expiration of offer, that's on 32A of the old offer. The old purchase agreement is 32A on the new one. The difference is that these things, 32A was, you filled it out at 32. You didn't fill it out right up front. Initial deposit, you filled it out, well, in the first section. But let's go to loan amount. You filled it out in the first section. But when you get down here, like when you get to verification of funds, you filled that out when you were on 5B. You didn't have it at the beginning. You waited till you got to the couple pages to 5. You know, here, when you're talking about your contingencies, you didn't fill this out until, I don't know where your contingencies were, but you filled it out on your contingencies where you actually filled it out at 14. So you filled it out when you got to 14, which would have been like on the old one, like on the 4th page. Here, everything is going to be filled out up front. So once you fill it out up front, you can read about it on the other pages. I'm going to keep going, but I want you to raise your hand if that doesn't make sense, and we'll slow down. So the first thing you're going to do as you fill it out, you're past the beginning, which is normal, is you're going to put in the purchase price. A little different here. You don't have room to type it in the letters. You just put it in the numbers. If it's all cash, you check this box. If it's not, you don't. The next one, close of escrow. You put in the number of days or the date, just like before. The next one, the expiration of offer. Instead of being at the very end of the offer in 32A, it's right up front. Could be 3 days after the buyer signs, or you could write something in. The next one is initial deposit, just like on the old contracts. You write it in and you can write a percentage. When you write it, it should automatically populate the percentage. And if you write the percentage, it should automatically populate the amount. But then look at this. Derek, read that to me.
Yeah, unmute. Okay. Percent number above is for calculation purposes and is not a contractual term.
So here, I'm going to tell you guys what that means. I'm going to ask you, anybody but a manager. If you write $1 million offer and you want 3%, you put 30,000 and 3%. And the other broker counters you at $1,050,000 and doesn't mention the deposit. What is the deposit going to be if it gets accepted?
Leave it the same.
You say it's going to stay 30,000. It's not going to go up to 33,000 or 30, whatever
Yeah,
it is.
because he hasn't mentioned it.
You're correct. You're correct. So what this is saying is that if it gets countered, the number takes effect, not the percentage. Everybody with me?
Yes.
So if you want to have a 3% deposit at the higher number, you have to put that in your counter offer. Is there any questions about that? Good. That deposit is supposed to be within 3 days, 3 business days, or you can put something else by wire transfer. So it no longer gives you those choices of a check or whatever. You can write other, but I'm going to show you in the agreement, it says if the escrow company doesn't want to take something else, it automatically defaults back to wire transfer. The next one is an increased deposit. This is in the purchase agreement already, just in a different spot. And this is if you want to place additional money into escrow. I don't know if you guys know this, but if the deposit doesn't come in with the original offer, it's no longer subject to liquidated damages unless you do a special form that says it's going to be subject to liquidated damages. And that is form DID. It's right there. So let's say you did 5,000 and then you did 25,000 instead of 30. And this 25,000 would be upon removal of contingencies. Now, to be fair, if you do that, nobody's taking your offer. But let's say they did. You put in 5, and then you put in another 25, which would give you 30. And if you didn't use this DID form, and they removed all contingencies and backed out for no reason, the seller would only get to keep the 5. The 25 would have to be returned because only the money that comes in with the original deposit is subject to liquidated damages. Unless you use this form. I don't really love this. I think your buyers are going to ask you, well, can't I do a smaller deposit until I remove my contingencies when they see this option? And you're going to see that a lot in this contract, but you need to let them know this contract's made for all over California. And it's made for any scenario. And in different places and under different scenarios, this could be more common. But in our area, we just never, ever see it. So that's the best example. That's the best explanation I can give you. Any questions on that? The loan amount, you're going to put in the first loan amount. Now, by the way, if you put in the price and the loan amount, when it gets down here to figure out what the balance of down payment is, wherever it is, I think I just passed it. When it figures out the balance of down payment here, it will automatically figure it out. So it'll calculate it through for you. So that's the loan amount. You do your loan amount and you could do the percentage of the purchase price. But you know what's odd? You see how this is here? Percentage above is not for is for calculation purposes and not a contractual term. And it says the same thing on the increased deposit. Why doesn't it say it here on the loan amount? What do you guys think? So if this says 80 and it says the percentage is for calculation, not a contractual term in all these other places, but not here, what does that mean?
It means that the loan is a contractual obligation, the amount.
And that's how it's going to be read, that the loan is a contractual obligation. So if it's an 80% loan, you're obligated to continue to put 20% down. Now, I think, in order to make it like crystal clear, you should put that in your counteroffer, price to be $1.5 million, down payment to be at least 20% or whatever it is. But if you don't, I think it is a contractual term because it says it. The next thing is you want to put your interest rate in here if you're the buyer. If you're the seller, you don't care either way unless it's too low. So if you're the seller, I would pad it at least 0.5 point. So right now I would try to look for, 3 3/4 or more. What this means when you put the rate not to exceed, it means if you can get, if the rate goes higher and you can still get the loan, you don't have to buy it. But if you put no rate in here and the rate goes to 5% and you're still qualified, that's not a contingency if you put nothing because you didn't leave yourself a way out. So this only becomes a contingency if you put a rate in here. Theoretically, it could be argued that, you'd never have no contingencies, but somebody could argue that you could have got a hard money loan and you could have got approved for that. So, hey, tough luck. Although it says conventional, so maybe not. But if you want to protect your buyer, you need to put a rate in here. If you want to get your offer through, it better be at least 0.5% higher. If you put no rate in here, it just means they're going to buy it at whatever the rate is, so long as they can qualify. And there is a little protection. It has to be a conventional loan. Any questions on that? It pre-populates to 0 points or up to, I'd probably put 1%. Remember, the buyer isn't committing to 3 3/4 and 1%. The buyer has the right to lock in now if they want lower, but if rates go up, they still need to buy it. No questions, right? Obviously, if it's VA or FHA, they would check these boxes. They would also have these forms. FVAC, that's the VA addendum. HID, that's the, that's the addendum for both, for like an FHA and government loan. If they're not having this, they don't have that. If it's seller financing, you check it. If it's other, private, like a hard money loan, you check that. So no questions there, right? The next thing is if it's VA or FHA, you have to deliver a list of lender required repairs within 17 days or whatever. I'm going to keep going. Any questions so far?
No, no questions.
All good here.
Sweet. Additional financing, this would be like a second trust deed if they're going to get a second. Sometimes you'll have a conventional second, that's like a HELOC that goes behind it. Or you'll have a seller financing or other private. And it would be the same thing. We don't see a lot of seconds right now, but we do see some where like maybe they'll get the high balance conforming rate because they won't qualify for a jumbo. If Fannie Mae is a little less strict. And then above that, they'll put a HELOC, like a line of credit, and draw it out up front. So you may see that there. Occupancy, this thing's changed. By the way, if you want to read about additional financing, where do you find that in the contract?
5C, number 2.
Exactly. Occupancy type. Remember the old one said owner occupied and not owner occupied. This one's been changed, so it's primary, secondary, or investment. So I suppose secondary is like a vacation home, home for your kids, home for your mother-in-law. Investment would be like a rental property. So you would just check one of those boxes if it applied. Like I said, the balance of down payment should automatically come up and the purchase price will come up because it's going to take it from right here. Pretty simple so far, right?
Yep.
If I'm buying a beach house, what is that? What do I check?
Secondary.
And I'm very lucky, right?
Very.
And if I'm buying a rental house, what do I check?
Investment.
And if I'm buying a house that my kid's gonna live in, what do I check? I could check either one.
Secondary or, yeah.
Yeah, great. Now they've added this here, seller's credit to buyer, if any. The reason they added this here is, believe it or not, we had transactions where there was a credit to buyer and nobody saw it on the contract. And then it went to either close without it, or it came up at the closing and everybody missed it because you guys were writing it either on additional financing terms, which was at the beginning hard to miss, but sometimes they were writing in like additional terms, which was easy to miss. It's like on the, it was like on the 5th page. So now it's right in here with the financing part. So a seller credit would not be a credit after an inspection. So let's not get confused. That would be on a request for repairs or a response to a request for repairs. A seller credit would be right up front. So we're not seeing it much in this market if you're new in real estate, but you're going to see the market's going to eventually shift to where it's not quite a seller's market. And if I brought you an offer that said it was $1 million, but it's really written at $1,015,000, but you're only going to get $1 million, even though the offer says $1,015,000. And my buyer is going to get $15,000 in closing costs. So you're going to get $1,015,000, but you're going to give my buyer $15,000 in closing costs because frankly, they're putting 10% down. That's $100,000. They can't come up with 120, which is what it's going to be to close. This way, they only need to come up with 105 because you're going to credit them 15 and the lender's okay with it. Would you have a problem with it if it was explained to you that way?
No.
I wouldn't either. I wouldn't either. Obviously, if I get a cash offer, I'm not taking it. You know, and now you could worry, oh, what about the appraisal? That'll make it even harder. So maybe you'd have a problem. But if you're going to do that, that goes in here. I want you to remember, though, by the way, if you put a percentage of the purchase price and they counter a higher price, does it stay the number or the percentage of the purchase price?
The percentage of the purchase price.
You better read it really good. So if you put 2%, and that's 20,000 at $1 million, and they countered $1,030,000. And
Stays the 20,000 if you put the 20.
What is it?
It stays the 20,000.
Because the percent number above is for calculation purposes and not a contractual term. So that way there can be no confusion. I want you to remember, that these are going to be applied to closing costs, and the lender will allow up to 3% if the loan is, God, what is it? If the loan is, I don't know. God, I'm losing my mind. They'll allow up to 3% up to a certain loan amount, and they'll allow they'll allow up to 3% if it's 90% loan to value, I think it is, and unlimited closing costs if it's 80% or less. However, NFHA, they'll allow up to 6% or VA. And closing costs could be anything. It's not non-recurring anymore. However, where do you read about this, everybody? So if you want to think about the seller credit to buyer, where would you read about it?
5E.
So let's go to 5E, because before you ask too much, you better know what it says. Limits on credits to buyer. By the way, this isn't just 3G, it's also any source, like request for repairs, anything. Any credit to buyer is specified in 3G1, that's what we just read, or otherwise agreed from any source, which could be a response to a request for repairs, for closing costs or any other costs that are agreed to by the parties. A contractual credit shall be disclosed to buyer's lender, we know that, if any, and made at the close of escrow. If the total cost allowed by buyer's lender allowable credit is less than the contractual credit, then 1, the contractual credit from seller shall be reduced to the lender allowable costs. How do you guys feel about that? So if you ask for 30,000 and the closing costs are only 15,000, what happens to the other 15,000? You read it to you again. If the total cost allowed by buyer's lender, so you've agreed on 30,000, but the buyer's lender will only allow 15,000. If the total credit allowed by buyer's lender allowable credit is less than the contractual credit, then the contractual credit from the seller shall be reduced to the lender allowable limit. So instead of, it may say 30,000 in the contract, now it's going to be reduced to 15,000. In other words, the seller gets 15,000 more. How do you guys feel about that?
That's pretty crazy if you're representing the buyer and you don't catch that.
Be very careful when you're representing the buyer that these credits are more than what's allowed. And that's why the agreement not only has part for a credit, it also, the request for repairs, it also has a part to reduce the price. Because after a certain amount, you can't do the credit. And it says there should be no automatic adjustment to the purchase price to make up for the difference between the contractual credit and the lender credit. So unless it says, in the absence of a separate written agreement between the parties, there should be no automatic adjustment in the purchase price. So if it doesn't say 15,000 and 15,000 reduction in the purchase price, it says 30, you're losing it. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're doing a credit. Little sideshow there. So that's the
Hey,
seller.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the lender credit would be on the buyer side, like how much credit that,
The buyer would get a credit.
right? So that there's a max amount that the buyer can get.
There's a maximum amount that a lender will allow a buyer to get. Because if you put 10% down, they really want you to put 10% down, not get a huge credit.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
So the next one, thank you. Anybody else? Can I keep
Yes.
going?
I just have a very quick question. Can you scroll your page back just to the bottom of the first page? I just want to see so it says purchase price total, right?
Yeah.
And then right below it, if you got to be really paying attention to the next line on top of page 2 about the seller credit. if you enter in, let's say $10,000, does it factor into that purchase price total on the previous page, or does it not?
No, you're getting 10,000 less than that purchase price. total.
Right, so
But-
so it doesn't
but-
include it.
But if you increase the purchase price total by 10 and ask for 10 here and tell
Right.
them, right, it says 1,000,010, but it's really only 1,000,000 because you're giving us 10.
Sure,
You're giving us 10 because they're only putting down, instead of putting down another 10,000, we're only got to put down 1,000 because it's 10% down.
right.
So
Yeah,
you
I was
just-
just curious. You just gotta be really careful, because if you look at any purchase offer received as a listing agent, and you're looking at the bottom of page 1, and you don't, and they say, oh, we've got an offer in for what, $930,000, and then you didn't, because you're just briefly looking at it, you gotta be really careful, that's all.
And that's why I love that it's in here. This is Karen, right?
Yes,
And Karen, this is why I love that it's in here.
yeah,
Because the old agreement, you guys were putting it like on page 5.
right.
Additional,
Put it on the bottom of page 1 under finance
Or
terms
very-
than somewhere else.
at least this is right up front. It's harder to miss.
Right,
Because
right,
we were missing it.
right. Thank you.
Next one would be additional financing terms. I mean, I guess if they were doing a third or something else, who knows? So if there's any additional financing terms, I can't think of any. I'm sure somebody can, you would write it in there. Then the verification of all funds is either attached with the offer, or you give it within 3 days. So if it's not a cash offer, does 5B apply?
No.
You're right. Because they've split these apart before they were grouped together. So if it's not a cash offer and they're getting a loan, they have to verify the down payment and closing costs. It's either attached to the offer within 3 days. So you should probably attach them to the offer in this marketplace. The next one is verification of loan application. I don't like the way that they wrote that. And it says attached to the offer. This doesn't mean they're attaching a loan application. It means they're going to attach one of these things, a pre-qual, a pre-approval, or a fully underwritten pre-approval. I just want to tell you what the difference is. If I call a lender and I tell them like how much I make, and I tell them I got great credit, and I tell them how much I have in the bank, but they don't really verify it, that's a pre-qual. If I apply to a lender and they run my credit report and I give them a copy of my tax returns and they have my bank statements, they can give me a pre-approval. If the lender takes that and actually submits that application to a investor, the person that's giving the loan, and they underwrite it and approve it, obviously it's subject to, the prelim and the appraisal, then it's a fully underwritten pre-approval. So we all need to know what the difference is to make sure we're getting what we're supposed to get. So pre-approval, that's the worst. A pre-qual, that's the worst. Pre-approval is a little bit better, and fully underwritten is much better. Any questions on that?
Yeah, for the fully underwritten, if we attach the DU, would that be fully underwritten?
A DU would be fully
Wait,
underwritten.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, DU would be fully underwritten as well. If they just have a pre-approval from the lender, I've reviewed their credit. I've reviewed this, I've reviewed that, I've got it all. They're pre-approved, that's a pre-approval. Pre-qual, I've spoken to them based on what they told me about their credit, income history, and deposits. I believe that they're qualified for the loan. Those are the differences. The next one is the final verification of condition. That's 5 days before the close of escrow. That's the same as before if you read it. It's a walkthrough, not a contingency of the transaction. Can somebody tell me what that walkthrough is for? It's for 2 things. What's it for?
To make
You got it.
sure everything is essentially the same as it was when you made your offer.
So it's to make sure that everything is the same as when you made your offer, correct? And to make sure one other thing,
Repairs have been done.
that any agreed upon repairs were made. Exactly. Thank you, Jerry. The next one is an assignment request. So if you're going to assign it, you have to do it within 17 days. I'm going to go to 23 because there's a change here. And then I'm going to come back. We had a lot of problems with assignments in the old contract. Oh, come on, go to 23. A long contract. Assignment. This first sentence has been added, or this first part has been added. Buyer shall have the right to assign all of buyer's interests in this agreement to buyer's own trust or any whole owned entity of buyer that is in existence at the time of such assignment. The old agreement started here. Buyer shall not assign any and all or part of buyer's interest in this agreement without first having obtained a separate written consent of seller to a specified assignee. Such consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. So the question is, what's reasonable? In this new one, they can't say that assigning it to your LLC or your trust or your entity, they can't say that, they can't say no to that. They have to say yes. Then you have to look at other scenarios, what's reasonable. Linda and I decide we spent too much on our credit card, so we have to put our kid on title with us. So we want to add him. Is that reasonable? What do you think? I'm going to say yes. To me, that's reasonable, but it doesn't say that. To me, that's reasonable. I think it would be hard to say no to that. I tie up your property. I buy it. I stick it in the MLS, subject to acquiring title. I sell it for 50,000 more. I want to assign it. Is it unreasonable to say I'm not going to agree to that?
Yes.
I agree. So they don't have to agree to that. Let's say in the additional terms, I say, hey, I'm going to try to resell it at a higher price and I have the right to assign it. Well, then you have the right to assign it. So I don't want anybody from Rodeo doing that. You know, there are agents doing that. That's kind of a scummy thing to do. But this has been changed. So don't have your buyer, your seller can't say no if the buyer's assigning it to their entity. So a lot of times they'll buy it, then they'll create an LLC for it. A lot of this happens like with celebrities, sometimes with investment property. You know, a lot of times the LLC will be in the name of the property LLC. Why pay for getting an LLC if you don't know if you have the property? When do you need to do that by? How long do you have to get that done?
17 days.
That is correct. That's what it said. You guys are great students here. Let's go back to where we were. Okay, there's your assignment request. The next one, the loan. Remember, it was 21, now it's 17. If it has no loan contingency, you just check right here. You don't need to be, remember the old one? We had to search back into the contract and check it. I think it was like around 14. It could have been 8A, but I think it was 14. I think it was in the 14 where the contingencies were. Next one, appraisal. Any questions there? No loan contingency. You check it if you want no loan contingency. If you don't check it, you know, we're going to go to another spot. Appraisal. Appraisal contingency. It's contingent upon, I'm sorry, it's appraisal contingency based upon the appraised value at a minimum of the purchase price or blank. That appraisal contingency is defaulted to how many days?
17.
Or you could do no appraisal contingency. Right?
Yeah, it's been happening a lot.
And if you do no appraisal contingency, you're not allowed to do that. It's not binding if you use the FVAC. When would you use the FVAC?
It's a VA loan.
When it's a VA loan, because legally you can't take their money on a VA loan if it doesn't appraise. So it doesn't matter what you write. If it's a, if they're using the FVAC, if it's a VA loan, they ought to, that's not binding. So let me ask you a question. Let's say I say I'm putting 20% down. of the purchase price. Okay? And remember, this percentage is a contingency of the transaction. Whereas on the initial deposit or the increased deposit or a seller credit, it is for calculation purposes and not a contractual term. So if I'm putting 20% down and I'm buying it for $1.5 million, how much am I putting down?
I think 37.5.
No, 300,000, right? $1.5 million times 20% would be 30,000, 300,000, right?
Mhm.
So 20% of $1.5 million is 300,000. But let's say I have no appraisal contingency and it only appraises for $1 million. What am I obligated to put down?
The balance.
The balance. So instead of 300, I'm now obligated to put down 800. Well, what if it's a wacky appraisal? You know, although we did have a deal that Carrie did with Adrian and it was a wacky appraisal and you know, I think they bought it for $1,750,000 and they appraised for $1.3 million and they couldn't get the appraiser to bring it up and they didn't know what to do and they had no appraisal contingency. So you know what? He just went to another lender, got a new appraisal. Guess what it appraised for?
Full price.
Right, $1,750,000. So we didn't have a problem. But if they didn't get that other appraisal, so if it was $1.5 million and only appraised for $1 million, no appraisal contingency, you'd have to put down 500,000 plus what you were originally putting down.
Right.
To protect yourselves, we were writing no appraisal contingency up to a certain amount and trying to write it out. That's what this allows you to do. So you would still leave the appraisal contingency, but it'd be appraisal contingency, appraisal based on appraised value at a minimum of the purchase price, or so instead of $1.5 million, you can write $1.3 million. So if it appraises 200,000 less, you're still buying it. So a little safer than this, and it'll probably satisfy the agent.
Yeah.
Any questions on that? That's obviously a change in the contract.
A good one.
Next one, investigation of property, that's 17 days. You read about it in 8C and 12. This has been added. There's informational access to the property. So you could have additional time. So in this one, you have 17 to do your inspections and 17 for information. Everything's set at 17. So that means you have the right to get in for 17 days. But what if you be able to get in after your inspection contingency is done? Let's say you want to buy a house with no inspection contingency and you're removing all contingencies. But you want to be able to get your painter in and your carpet person in to measure and be ready so you can start when you close. In the old contract, they didn't necessarily need to let you in if there was no time left on the inspection because there was no inspection. In this contract, if you fill that out, they still need to let you in, but it's not a contingency of the transaction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it allows you to get access to the property under the contract, even after the contingency's over.
But Sid, is the language different than it was on the previous one for 14C before?
It's a little bit different because it didn't let you fill out an additional time period, did it?
I think you could on a later.
Good.
It
Oh,
did
you
on
have
14.5.
later version. So it's probably similar, but it's moved up here, but that's what it's for.
Yeah,
So
it is.
remember, if I have a 17-day inspection contingency and a 17-day access to the property, on the 20th day, do they need to let me in?
No.
But if you say I'm not letting you in, what's the buyer gonna think?
You're hiding something.
They may think that, but that doesn't matter what they think.
It doesn't
This
matter.
will have them, they'll have to let you in. It'll be a contractual agreement to let them in, you know, to measure for furniture or whatever. That's what that is. The next one is the review of seller documents. Now, remember, we haven't got to when the seller has to give you the documents, but it's 17 days after inspections or 5 days after receipt, whatever is later. Believe it or not, that's a change that if I asked 100 agents, 99 wouldn't recognize. So the old agreement, let's say you had 7 days to get to get all the documents. And let's go over what those are. So seller delivery of documents, and that's in 14A. It kind of lists everything that they need to get. Okay. It kind of lists everything, all the documents, all the disclosures, everything. It's all just kind of listed in there. And let's say one is the prelim. So let's say one is like the prelim. And let's say that they get that to you on the 7th day. But this is 10 days, not 17. If they get it to you on the 7th day, you're only going to have 3 days, and they could cancel. They can give you a notice to perform that would end at the end of the 3rd day. On the old agreement, they could do that even if it was less than 5 days. So you had less than 5 days if it came within the 7 days. You only had the additional 5 days if it came after the 7 days. So you could have less than 5 days on some stuff. This has been changed, so you never have less than 5 days. And you have to read the fine print to recognize that, but that's a good change. We had one with the preliminary title report where they got in the 7th day and they needed 10. Something showed up on the 7th day, which was a Saturday that they got. You know, they had to remove all contingencies by Monday, but they saw something on the preliminary title report that they couldn't build a 2nd story, and they didn't even have the title document. Seller gave a notice to perform for 11:59 Tuesday. They called me. They said, "Don't I have 5 days?" I said, "No, you don't. You got it within the 7 days." It's correct. And I rewrote it for them, it's clear as light. Now you always have at least 5 days. So it's 17 or 5 days after you get it, whatever's later. Now you always had 5 days if you got it after, if you got it late. But you didn't have 5 days if you got it on time. So you always have at least 5 days. Monty, did you have a question or just unmuted?
Just following, it's all good.
Okay. The next one is the common area. I just saw you unmuted, that's why I asked. The next one's the common area. Does be your condo stuff, 17 days or 5 days, whatever's later. So if you don't get it until 13 days, you'd actually have 18 days, right? The next one is review of leased or lien items. Those are like solar panels, propane tanks, different kinds of loans. Obviously, if you want to remove any contingencies, so you have no loan contingency, no appraisal contingency, but any appraisal contingency you're going to remove in any of these L1 on, you need to attach a contingency removal that removes that contingency. So just saying in the contract, I'm removing this isn't enough. They wanted a contingency removal with it. Everybody see that?
Yep.
That I think we were doing as a matter of practice, but it didn't clearly say that. This scares me. Sale of buyer's property, and you're supposed to use the COP. But what if you check this and forget to attach the COP? And the buyer ends up saying, "Oh, I can't buy, I never sold my house," and you never notice this little tiny check bar. You better be careful, right? So keep an eye on that when you're reviewing an offer that comes in. Because I can see this being so small that we miss it. The next one is time of possession. This is a change that I'm not happy with, and a bunch of us brokers tried to talk the forms committee into changing it, and they so far haven't. Now, when it pops up, maybe they will. But possession is upon the notice of recordation. So you know when you get a call and they say, "I'm confirming that it closed," confirmation, that's when possession is supposed to change. Technically, if you get confirmation at 11, it's the buyer's house at 11. But what if the seller had the moving van come in the morning? They're not going to be out by 11. You could have some problems there. I would still check off 6 p.m. That's what it defaulted to before. If it's anything different than upon recordation or 6 p.m. on the date, then you have to use, you have to go to 3M too. Then you have to use either a seller in possession form or residential lease after sale. So if it's 29 days or less, that's a seller in possession. Believe it or not, 29 days and less doesn't really give them any more rights than if they had to be out at 6 p.m. and it recorded at 8 in the morning. However, once they've stayed there 30 days, they've become a tenant, and now they do have additional rights. So these forms are really important that you use them. By the way, when are they supposed to come in with when are they supposed to come in?
Rephrase the question.
If your seller is going to rent back or stay up to 29 days, when is this form supposed to be filled out?
With any purchase contract or counter offer.
Yeah, it's supposed to be with the purchase
Exactly.
contract here. So
Right.
CAR form,
With acceptance.
if it's 29 days or fewer, CAR form residential lease after sale attached if it's 30 days or more. We have this problem all the time where they're not attached, and it didn't say that in the old purchase agreement, or if it did, it was in the fine print. And what would happen is we'd have a transaction. So Christy, you're on here, right? Christy, you with us?
Yes. Yes.
So in your office, we had one where they did it late, and the buyer wanted a security deposit from the seller.
Yes.
You know, if they wanted a security deposit from the seller, when should they have asked for that? A week before closing or when they did their offer?
When they did their offer.
And that's why it's supposed to be attached. So you make your deal when you make your deal. You're not constantly renegotiating your deal. Any questions about time of possession and seller and possession after? The next one, if it's a tenant occupied, you're taking over the tenant. It's a tenant occupied property addendum. So if it's tenant occupied, you just use that addendum, or if you have some kind of other agreement, you have other. The next one, seller delivery of documents, that's within 7 days. The next one, they need to sign and return escrow instructions within 5 days. I don't recall if that said that in there before, but now it does. So if the seller doesn't return their escrow instructions within 5 days, what can the buyer do?
Yes,
What?
can walk away.
Nope, not yet.
Notice to perform.
Correct. And if the buyer
Yep,
has,
yep.
what can the seller do?
Notice to perform.
And they need to order the HOA docs within 3 days. And they need to order they need to install the smoke detector, CO2 detector, and water heater bracing within 7 days of acceptance.
Right.
That's a change. So a lot of times they weren't getting it done till the end, but what if the appraiser goes to check it? Now you got to pay them to come back again. So that now needs to be done within 7 days. Evidence of representative authority, by the way, in this agreement, you only need it if you assign it. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. But you can read about that in 28. Can I keep going? Any questions so far?
All good.
This part is my least favorite part of this contract. So this says items included, has all these things to check. And of all these things, the only thing that comes pre-checked are bathroom mirrors unless excluded. Again, nothing else is checked. But then it says all items specified in 9B are included and the following if checked. But it has like stove, oven, refrigerators, wine refrigerator, dishwasher, microwave, security system. You know, now I'm going to go to 9 because that's where you read about it, right? And now I'm going to go to 9B, existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating fixtures, ceiling fans, fireplace insert, gas logs and grates, solar power systems, built-in appliances and appliances for which a special opening or encasement has been made, whether or not checked in 3P, windows and door screens, awnings, shutters. I mean, it just goes on and on. So here's my question. You got a dishwasher, you got a built-in refrigerator, you got a built-in microwave or microwave where they have an opening built. And you don't check this off. do you think it's possible the seller may remove it? Because they never went to read 9B?
Yes,
I really hate this part that they added this. I think you need to be really careful. Even if they're built in, I want you to check them.
check them.
You don't have these problems. And if it comes out without them checked, I want you to make a list of what's built in so that there's no misunderstandings. Yeah, they should have not even put this in. They should have just excluded them or had this inclusion, but not to have all this stuff. So. Any questions there?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Under the part that says home automation, smart home features,
Right.
on the second line down in parentheses, it says hardwired or wirelessly. Does that include a Wi-Fi router or a mesh, whole house mesh system?
You know, it looks like it does, but let's go to 9B because I bet it's popped back in here.
That's where I was, 9B part 4.
Well,
second
no, no.
line.
Oh, okay, I was on the other part.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
on the.
This
I'm on
says it's
page 6.
included. All such items included in the system, whether or not. Wait a minute.
Paragraph 4.
Yeah, whether they're hardwired or not. So they're included. So they're included here. They're included, but if you don't check this, I think your seller may think they're not and pull it out of there. And when the buyer gets there, they're going to be searching for it or paying for it or taking it back from the person that they gave it to. So I don't like that this is in there. And I don't know why it's in there. I suppose there may be some kind of smart home control devices that are, I don't know. It's a conflict, Bernie.
And number 5, it goes on, but it's really confusing.
Well, if you check that if you don't check it's included, remember it says everything specified in 9B are included.
Well, in 5, then it goes on, it says, I don't know, it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, we've had a lot of problems with this recently, just this last week.
So they're saying except for non-dedicated personal computer, tablet, or phone used to control such features. But that seems to leave out the Wi-Fi router or the whole house, mesh network. I think those have to stay.
No, they don't. So I'm going to show you why. You ready?
Yep.
These are non-dedicated devices. So if you check that 3P, then they got to stay. And that would be, I think they got to stay, but that's not what this says. So any non-dedicated personal computer, tablet, or phone. So you can take that. Which part are you asking about?
The router and the Wi-Fi and if you have a mesh network.
No, what they're saying is that the buyer's advised to change all the passwords in that. Oh, buyer acknowledges that a separate device and access to Wi-Fi or internet may be required. What they're talking about is, let's say you have Spectrum cable, and that's where you're getting your internet. Remember, when you have Spectrum cable, they're going to take your router, and when the new buyer puts it in, they're going to put in a new router. And then it'll have to be reprogrammed. I think that's what they're trying to talk about, but it is confusing. I'm with you.
Sid, question.
Yeah.
Instead of buying a new router, can you purchase that router and change passwords on that?
I don't know that Spectrum would allow you. It depends on where you're getting your internet access from.
Well, if you ask, like, when you are you're moving from one house to another, you change your DWP system, can
that's-
that be done the same way?
Not to my knowledge. So I just did one and the buyer wanted to keep my stuff and we had to turn it all back in and then they had to have Spectrum come back out and hook it in.
Oh, okay.
So
Thank
no,
you.
it wasn't that easy. It should be, but it's not. But I don't know. I can't give you I'm not going to give you the answer you want, Bernie, except for that I agree it's confusing. And I don't like this smart hole control devices because it's back in 9B. So in 9B, it tells you you have to leave it if you have it. And why would you have to check it? You know, and this says even if you don't check it, it's included if it's in 9B. I think we're going to have a lot of problems here. And that's why you're going to have to check this stuff off. I really think that this whole section should have been left out. And they should have done additional items included and you write it in or excluded. Any other questions before I go on?
Yeah, Sid, just a quick thing on item on 9 or on P. If we're in doubt, should we just exclude items?
No, I think the items excluded would be anything here in 9B. So if they say they want to keep, let's go back to 9B. So any attached fixture or fittings that are attached to the property, what if they want to keep their chandelier? Then you would exclude it. Lighting, I guess that would be the chandelier. Let's say they want to keep their towel rack. You would write in towel rack and master. You know, I got it from my great-great-grandfather. I want to keep it. Bernie, did you pop up? I just had to admit you again. All right. Hopefully I didn't do it wrong. So did I cut Bernie off? Oh, there you are.
No, I'm
So-
back. I was on my phone, now I'm on my computer.
Got it. Yeah, I had to admit you again. Derek's supposed to be handling the admitting, but he didn't do it, so I reached over.
I did do it.
Oh, I did it too. I guess we admitted them together simultaneous, a simultaneous admit. So let's say the drapery matches their bed sheet. So let's say the drapery matches your bed sheet, your whatever you call it, what's it called? Not your bed sheet, the top piece of your bed, your bedspread.
Comforter.
So your draperies and your
Or
bedspread.
duvet.
Duvet, yeah, duvet, that's it.
Whatever, your duvet. I'm gonna call you your bedspread. So your bedspread and your drapes match. Okay. Does that mean you have to leave your bedspread?
No,
I agree with you.
no.
Your bedspread and your draperies match, and you're allowed to take your bedspread. Does that mean you're allowed to take the draperies?
No,
It's
You're
attached.
right. Of course not. But if you want the draperies, that's where you would
you
write it.
write it in, yeah.
Yeah, that's where you would write it's excluded. Did I answer that question?
Mhm.
So,
The
Sid,
problem is, I don't like is you've got all this stuff. Security system, hardwired or soft wired, includes, it's all included.
so
You
Sid,
got, yeah,
should we just check off what we think is in there and, like especially like the,
I think you should, because
Yeah.
if a seller sees something not checked and they
Right.
weren't on this meeting with us, they're gonna think they get to take it.
right, so I think we
And
should
then they're
just
not
check
gonna
it
have
out.
it when they find out they gotta bring it back. So this should have never been in here. And
Right,
eventually it'll
stupid.
get taken out. But for now, you better
Check.
just check off all this stuff you think is staying.
Just check it off.
Just check it off. Even if you represent the seller, man, let's just say, paragraph P1, these things are included. And that's it. The ones that are going to be included anyway. So your seller doesn't leave with it.
Got it.
Terrible section. It was much better before where it was vague. At least they asked. And we could tell them, no, don't take that. Now it looks like they think they can and they can't. Next one is a zone disclosure. Where would they read about that?
City report.
But where would they read about it if they want to know what it all means?
Property ID and all that?
10A or 11A.
10A and 11A, it'll explain it all.
It says it's right.
Now, now we're at who pays for things. So this thing will allow you to put buyer, seller, or both. When it's both, they're splitting it 50-50. Unless otherwise agreed. So normally, you know, now different areas are different things. In our area, normally the seller would pay for that. But the seller may say, well, you could check off buyer. So you know what, if they tell you counter buyer, don't say no, just do it. And that would be environmental, other, and provided by whoever. You could ask for another report. Let's say it's got a well. You could say a well report, you know, buyer, seller, or both. You know, whatever. I wouldn't ask for a termite report. Why? What if happens if you ask for a termite report here?
Lenders
Lender
don't.
will want to get involved.
The lender's going to want to see it. The lender's going to want to see it, and then they're going to want a clearance. So that shouldn't be something that's in there. The next one, smoke alarm, CO2 detectors, water heater, bracing, buyer, seller, or both. By the way, when does it have to be installed by?
Before the appraiser comes in.
Nope.
7 days.
10 days after the acceptance.
How many days?
7.
7 days, before 7 days.
Within 7 days of acceptance. So let's say the buyer's going to pay for it. This agreement actually says that if the buyer's going to pay for it, they either pay for it or they put the money into escrow to cover what the bill for what they're supposed to pay for. And if you guys want, I can show you where that is later, but it actually says that. So if you check buyer, the buyer should like just give their credit card up front to the retrofit company, because if it doesn't close, there could end up a lien on the house. That's why they're supposed to put the additional money into escrow or pay for it out of escrow up front or when the work's done. But you're not going to have that. Usually the seller should pay for it in our area. The next one is any other government required point of sales, just so you know, and inspection reports. And the next one is government required point of sale, corrective or remedial action. Just so you know, California law is smoke detectors, CO2, and water heater bracing. All that stuff like earthquake gas shutoff valve, tempered glass or safety glass film, low flow toilets, low flow shower heads, low flow like on your sink faucets, all that stuff is a city requirement. That's what goes here. So that's the additional stuff. That's why this only has these three. Really everything is required, depending on where you are. This government required point of sale, that's like your 9A form in the city of LA. I don't know if anybody sells in Glendale. Glendale requires a city inspection. Westlake Village used to, since COVID, they're not requiring it, but they could go ahead and do it again. Usually the seller will pay for all these things, but it's a point of negotiation. Escrow fees.
I have a question about Q3.
Yeah.
If the buyer decides he wants to do a termite report and it's an all cash deal, like I say, it's $1.5 million, and he'll pay for it.
I don't think you need to write that in there because remember, that's part of their inspection. So the way this contract is written is they do their inspections on their own. Otherwise, why wouldn't you write an inspection, sewer line?
Right,
You know,
it's part of the due diligence. Yeah.
survey. So no, that's not really for that.
Got it.
Good question, though. Escrow fees, usually that's each to pay their own. So that one doesn't have both because I mean, that has both, but you would do each to pay their own there because remember, escrow fees are different if you're getting a loan or not. So if you're getting a loan, there's an additional fee. The more loans there are for a seller, there's additional fees for additional payoffs. And escrow holder, you know, it's ENCORE, Encore. Okay. Next one is owner's title insurance. Usually the seller will pay for that. But in Northern California, the buyer pays. So usually the seller. So remember, an owner's title insurance insures the buyer that they are getting fair, clear title, marketable, fair and marketable, clean and marketable title. The seller usually pays for that. But then a buyer, if they're getting a loan, will buy a policy for their lender. The buyer pays for that. Remember, if they're not getting a loan, there is no buyer's lender title insurance policy. Next one, city transfer fees. Usually the seller pays for that, but you could write buyer or both. If you write both, how do they pay it?
50/50.
That's correct. So just so you know, do you guys remember what is the LA County transfer tax? A little bit of a trick question.
What was it like 55 or $200? I'm trying to remember.
What do you guys think?
$1.10 per thousand on new money generated.
It's $1.10 per thousand on new money generated. So if you assume a loan, it's above the assumption, but most of these are new loans. So $1.10 per thousand. What is the LA City transfer tax? Bernie?
$4.50 per thousand.
So you guys might think it's $5.60 and it is, but it's $1.10 plus $4.50. If you're in Calabasas, they don't have a city transfer tax, so it's just $1.10. If you're in Santa Monica, it's $1.10 on the county, but their city transfer tax is $3 per thousand below 3 million and $6 over 3 million. So 2999999 will be 6,000. And 3 million will be 18,000. So it's important that your buyer or seller are aware, that your seller is aware of these fees. The next one is the HOA fee for preparing disclosures. They've got that the seller. And the reason why is, remember, that's part of the documents that the seller is supposed to deliver within 7 days. Or they're supposed to order within how many days?
5.
3.
That's correct. They are supposed to order it within 3 days. And the buyer has up to, the way this is written, 17 days or what?
5 days after. they
5
receive
days
it.
to receive it to disapprove of it. The next one is an HOA cert fee. The buyer pays that. Who wants that HOA cert?
Lender.
The lender.
The lender. So that's why the buyer's paying for it. Then there's an HOA transfer fee. Usually we'll write down seller. I haven't really seen any, but I guess some HOAs have a move-in or move-out fee. They'll each pay their own if it has that. The next one is a private transfer fee. I guess that would apply. Let's say you had a co-op or you were in Malibu Lake where they're all co-ops, then there might be a private transfer fee. And then any other fees or costs, I really can't think of any right off the bat. Home warranty, I'm not loving this. So the home warranty, the old agreement said to put in the options. The new agreement doesn't say that. It does have a cost not to exceed. But let's say you don't exceed the cost, but you don't buy the refrigerator and you buy the washer and dryer. And then the refrigerator goes out and it's $7,000 for the new Sub-Zero. What might the buyer say? Derek, what would the buyer say to your agent who would then come to you?
How come you didn't include it?
It could have been included. I didn't want the washer and dryer because I did the washer and dryer. We had money. I didn't want that. I wanted the refrigerator. So I think it's important to write them in here. And if you run out of room, write them in here. So I think you should always list the options so that the buyer and seller knew right up front which options you were getting. Is that okay with you guys? Just a little extra step. And if they're not getting, they're supposed to waive it so that they can't say, oh, I didn't know I could have got it. And a lot of times the seller will pay, sometimes the buyer, sometimes both. At that point, you're going to be pretty much finished filling out this agreement. There are some little things that you may need extra. If it's a probate, you're going to check this box. If it's a manufactured home, you're going to check this box. If it's tenant occupied, you're going to check that box. If it's a tenant in common purchase, that's like in West Hollywood, instead of doing like a lot split or a condo, they built 2 houses on the same lot and they have you buy them as a tenant in common. Not everybody loves that, but it's pretty protective, the agreement. If it's a co-op, there's a form. Other, I can't think of what it is, but I'm sure there's other. The next one is other addendum. So if you do an addendum, like if you're going to do an addendum, you're going to do addendum number 1, right? If you use the CAR addendum. If it's a backup offer, if it's a septic or well, buyer intend to exchange, you're going to do it. Other. I think this is where you would write in your Rodeo Realty addendum and affiliated business disclosure. You know, I keep meaning to ask Kyle if there's a way that this could automatically be checked here. And if there is, it will, so we don't forget it. The next one are buyer and seller advisory. So automatically the inspection advisory is going to pop up, the wire fraud, the fair housing, and the California Consumer Privacy Act. But what if you're in a hillside in a fire area? What else do you need to check?
Home hardening.
Yeah.
And when you do that right here, it should automatically pop up. That says wildfire.
It's not on here.
I
It
think
should
when-
be here, but it's not here.
Hopefully when you check this, that'll pop up. But if not, I'm sure the home hardening is written in the paragraph where the seller's providing it.
Yeah, it's
But you
probably
have-
like
well,
the
it's-
TDS. It's a required form in a disclosure area.
I'm sure it's written in there. But if it's a wildfire area, make sure you check that also. Trust advisory, if it's an REO, you check it.
I always use the market conditions advisory here.
Then you would check that and it should, once you check it, it should automatically populate.
Yeah, I don't see it here. I write it in.
I guess you'll have to check other and write it in, then it won't populate. But is that, could that be part of the statewide buyer and seller? You'll have to look and see if they added it to it. So you'll take a look, Bernie, and see if they added it to it. Maybe that's not why it's not here, but I don't know. You'll have to wait till the 14th when it populates on. But if you check it, it should automatically populate if it's working right. And at that point, you're really kind of done. All this other stuff is the stuff we talked about. Increased deposit, 5A2. Up here, increased deposit, 5A2, increased deposit. So then you just go through this other stuff. The only thing you're going to need to fill out after that is they move the liquidated damages and arbitration to the very end. That's the only, everything else is in the same order as before, except for the liquidated damages and arbitration. What they did, and this was smart, they moved it to the very end. So just before the signature page, that comes up. And that is because they don't want you searching throughout the contract. So you're going to fill out everything in the very beginning. You're going to do all the signing and initialing at the very end. And there you are. Now I'm going to give you a couple more things that I don't like, that I do like and that I don't like. You ready? The first thing. Expiration of offer. That's in 3C. So you don't need to fill it out there. But if it's an entity, if the buyer's buying as an entity, you just check that box. And that representative capacity, that's no longer required. So that representative capacity signature disclosure is no longer required. So if the name of the purchaser is like Bill Smith LLC or whatever, if they check this and they're putting their name here that they're authorized to sign, they can go ahead and sign it and you don't need any representative capacity anymore. However, if the entity is a trust or under probate, the full name of the trust or probate, including the case number, should be added. So if they're putting like Williams Estate, however they would put it, then they would put the full name of the Williams Estate, including the case number. If they do a trust, as far as I'm concerned, like if it's a Sid and Linda Leibovich revocable trust dated, August 24th, 1986, that's not going to fit at the top. So it would just say Sid and Linda Trust maybe, then you would write it all here. But if it fits in the top, you don't need to write it here. Any questions? Then it says that they acknowledge all 16 pages, and the buyer would sign. and they print their name and their title. They only need a title if it's an entity. The next, acceptance. So the seller, they should either accept it or check counter offer or check backup offer. By the way, if they don't check seller counter offer, you could have a problem if they issue but sign it and then the buyer signs it. So be careful. So they can either issue a seller counter offer or a backup offer or just accept it. If the seller's an entity, they just check this. Now remember, this is going to be left blank when you get it. So after the buyer signs, the other broker is not going to be filling this part out. This part will be filled out by the seller or their agent. So the seller will check the entity and they'll do the same thing. And they won't need the representative capacity either, unless it's like a revocable trust. Unless it's under a trust or a probate. And you can't get the full name. So you got to identify the full name there. Any questions so far? So no more representative capacity needed unless you assign one in later. Here's the part that I don't like. This is your real estate broker section. What this says is that the broker has the authority to be the person that accepts delivery for the buyer. That means when they send you a notice to perform, that's when the time starts. So if you give it to me today, when does the time start? When I give it to my buyer or when you give it to me?
You receive it.
And you're allowed to electronically put your email address or your phone number for a text. I really fought them. I really don't want these things being texted around. But in their wisdom, they left it. So you're gonna have to watch your text. If somebody texts you a notice to perform, that's when it got delivered. And you're gonna have to find a way to get that text to your email and get it to the client right away. This alternate number would be an alternate delivery, maybe a different email address or something. I really don't want you putting a TC's name in there because you know you're not doing enough deals to rely on your TC on your livelihood. You know, if a TC gets a notice to perform, do you really want to bank your whole deal on that? It should be coming to you. That's something you got to be doing. So, and I don't like text. If they put your text in there, you should counter it out or take it out. You should always try to get it notified by email. Any questions on that? Cool. Yeah, I really don't know why they put text in there. And it's the same thing for the seller's agent, email, text, or alternate. And that's when it would be an alternate delivery address only. The escrow holder signs it here. And oh, this is good. They have to put what kind of escrow company they are. So. Was that on there before?
I don't know.
I don't think so. You know, DRE escrow has
I
no,
don't think so.
no bond. You
It's
guys
been
know.
on for a couple weeks.
It has been?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, it's going to be on in this new one too. So that's good. And that's it. That's it. So I'm willing to answer any questions you have, but it really is very, very simple, don't you think?
Yeah. As the notice to perform, you used to have a spot where you could modify the number of days.
It will be, it is on the notice to perform.
But on the RPA, it used to. It used to have a place where you could modify the number of days. For
Not anymore.
It was
So
48 hours or.
That's going to default at 2 days. Here, I'll show you. I think it's in.
So no
4
one can sneak in something else then, like 7 or something.
Right, but your
No
seller's
one knows
allowed, your buyer or seller are allowed to give additional.
Sure,
They don't have to. They can't give less, but they can give additional.
but yeah, and so that's been removed then. It appears, yeah?
I haven't seen it and I've looked at it a lot.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So it says, you know, it doesn't really say. It doesn't really say notice seller to perform, so I believe it's been removed. Let's see if it's in the. Let's see if they put it in the, in here. I don't see it in here. I'm sure it says 2 days in here somewhere. I just haven't read it. I just assumed it did. I've read it, but I don't remember now where it is.
Okay,
Good question, though, that they're not allowing you to extend that.
okay. Good.
Well, I bet they find it and they add it. If they add it, they're gonna add it back up into that.
I've definitely received offers with that modified.
If they find it, they're gonna add it. I think it's in section N. So you'll know when they add it, because it's gonna go in that section N. And if you want to stay on at the end, I'll find it.
I mean, it's fine. I can hunt for it too. I just
I'll
want.
find it at the end. I want to see where it is. I just don't want to find it with everybody on.
Sure.
But it'll be in this section here. Somewhere, I don't know. It'll be somewhere in here with if they allow you to change it. So if it's not here, they're not allowing you to change it. Any other questions?
I have a couple of issues. I don't know if you want me to ask now or take them offline.
You could ask them, and I probably already brought it up to the forms committee, and they may change it by the time they upload it on the 14th, but I'm not aware of it.
All right, let me just, I read through this thing. I made some notes the other day. So page 6, top paragraph E1.
Hold on.
Under title.
Tell me what number it is, though.
It's E1. It's 8E1.
It's what?
8E1.
81.
Page 6.
Yes.
Under title.
Yep.
Notice there, it says that the buyer should be asking, buyer is advised to review all underlying documents and all other matters affecting title, including but not limited to any documents or deeds in the prelim and any plotted easements. Does this paragraph now create a standard of care for buyer's agents to request plotted easements?
I think it does. I think it does, but I have a feeling that that's been in there for a while. Did you read the old one?
I don't remember.
I have a feeling it's in there,
Okay.
but I think it does. I think it does.
All right. Oh, joy. Here's another question I have. Under the HOA documents.
Tell me what.
Do you want to address that first one first, or should I go on to the next one?
I think we're done with that one, right?
Yeah.
So it does standard of care. What number?
I guess it would be 8H, or more particularly K. It would be under
Yes.
K2. K2.
Here, let's
11
wait.
It would be 11K2.
Let's wait 1 second.
Okay,
If buyer does not remove contingency within the time specified,
right.
seller, after giving the buyer a notice to perform, shall have the right to cancel. So yes, they're not putting a time limit on this notice to perform. If they give you the form, it'll either be 2 days or whatever the seller gives them, Sheila. So there's no changing it here. It's what the notice to perform is.
So now go to 11K part 2 on page 8 towards the bottom.
11K part 2.
K2.
You have GHIJK.
So in here under section 2, in addition to the HOA documents, it also says disclose any pending or anticipated claims or litigation by the HOA.
That was in there already.
And the location and number of designated parking and storage spaces. So
that was in there already.
Here's something that I'm running across commonly. Some property management companies, especially, and now I'm blanking on the name, but some property management companies are not providing this information with the seller's HOA doc packages. They're saying, well, you got to pay extra for it. And now the listing agent wants the buyer to remove the HOA approval contingency, but they still haven't gotten this stuff. And it's an extra charge to get it by this particular property management company.
Well,
So-
obviously, to me, if the seller is paying for the package and you're supposed to get this with the package, the seller needs to pay for it. And notification from the buyer that says, I can't remove it because I don't have this would be a difficult thing, a difficult hurdle for the seller to overcome.
So I think it's Ross Morgan that's typically not providing it.
Well, they're gonna need to provide it, or,
They're not providing it.
well, then the seller's gonna have to pay the fee if the buyer asks for it.
So that
Now,
might
lot
extend
of-
the contingency.
If you get a notice to perform, you can send them back saying, we still don't have all the items. The client needs to, not you, because you're not a party. In K2, because we still don't have the location of the designated parking.
Or if there's any pending assessments or lawsuits. Because we're not providing it. Okay.
Yeah, if they're not providing it. Now, I want you guys to remember, you could have a little problem there, because is that reasonable if it says where the parking spaces, if it gives you the parking spaces number in the prelim and the HOA doesn't provide it, is it reasonable to say I don't have it when the prelim has it and it's marked on the ground? So not everything in real estate is black and white. That's all I'm getting at. I will tell you, we have 2 lawsuits right now. One in the Studio City office where everybody thought it was 2 parking spaces and it was 1. So we're trying to determine the value of a parking space. And we're also trying to say, well, you know, you should have got it from the HOA, even though we were wrong in the MLS. And we have another one in the Wilshire corridor where it's like a fully parked building. Like there's a valet.
Yeah.
And the space that the prelim says doesn't even exist. So, you know, the question was, well, why didn't the buyer go look at the parking spaces and the numbers? So there was a big thing on that too. So let's pay a little more attention to parking spaces. But Bernie, you're right. They should be providing all of this.
I have another one. If you look at number 11,
But if you don't get something that you're entitled to, they can't make you remove your contingency. But do we really want to fight with people, with the lawyers and stuff? Number 11.
number 11A3, it says that anyone who's providing a TDS is now required to provide a SPQ. Did that used to be the case as well?
No. Before it said that they have a right to either the SPQ or I'm sorry, that was in there already. Yes,
Okay.
that was in there already. But you know what wasn't in there, and it's still in there that way, is the avid. So not everybody wants to have an avid included. I mean, some brokers don't want it. We want it. We expect you to get it because it's much better. But let me read you the avid part.
Yeah, right there. In 2.
It says form. This one says seller's agent, if any, has completed and signed the seller's agent section 3, or if applicable, an avid. We want you to be doing an avid because that little seller section that's 3 lines is just not enough to protect you from liability. So it's either or, this thing says. But let me ask you a question. Who is the signers? Who is the people on this contract at the very beginning? It's between who? Who's not a party to the contract?
The agents.
You're right. That's what it says right in the very top of the agreement.
Right.
But the agent doesn't want to give it, but the seller or buyer wants it. I don't think the agent has a choice. But our policy is that you do the avid because it's much more protective of you. And it's a standard of care. You're never going to get past that standard of care issue, even no matter how this is written. Bernie, did I answer your question? that they're responsible to do an SPQ as well as a TDS?
Yes.
However, I know there are builders and stuff that counter, you're not gonna get an SPQ. And if they do, then they don't have to give it to you. But if there's no counter, they gotta give it to you. Anything else, or are we covering them all?
I'm good.
Surprised you don't hate that text thing. And what's included and what's not included, and having to be out as soon as you're notified that it recorded. To me, those are the worst parts of this agreement. Sheila, did you have another question? You just unmuted.
I don't have a question.
You do or you don't? Okay, that's it. Anybody else? Anything else? Cool, we got through another meeting. We got through another meeting, and I'm gonna unshare the screen.